Shane O'Neill going home this weekend to face his home county. There was a couple of quotes from the Limerick leader I'll go into in a second. But can you imagine yourself going up against your home county with that body? Even like, let's say you were a manager of a rival club team to burn a few years. Would you like that?
Could never do it at club level anyway. I think it's a little different at county level maybe. If you're going kind of earning your stripes, maybe like Eddie Brennan's going to be doing. He's going to be go down to Kilkenny later on the year. I couldn't imagine doing it. You have to remember as well that he would have been in the equation when John Cahill was manager. He would have been in the equation because Napirshy would have just won a Club All Ireland maybe 6 months previous maybe to that, and so he would have been in the equation for that job as well. It's a really interesting one, isn't it? Like, just think about it. 3 or 4 months ago, like, there's no way he could have envisaged himself being in this scenario. When Micheál Donoghue was still Galway manager, no one would have envisaged that to be a Limerick man managing Galway. And particularly he's a small family as well, I'd say. He probably never thought it himself. But sometimes when things come up, circumstances change.
And he was saying it's a bit of an odd feeling having to go and do that. But once you're in it, you probably at the very least see it as a project. You have to test yourself, see what level you can get to. Do you know that in 1997 he won a Munster title, he won a National League title. That was against Galway in 1997. And also back in 1993, himself and Kylie played together in a Munster under-21 final, lost to Cork. So those lads go back a fair bit too. Kylie wouldn't have been, he probably wasn't a frontline player for Limerick all that often. But it's kind of, it has to just be a little bit odd. But if we're to look at the game itself, this is probably the first big test for Shane O'Neill, isn't it? You know, they coasted past Westmeath last week and everyone would have expected that.
Yeah, definitely. Big test. You would have learned very little last weekend, been honest with you. How would you? They were playing against 14 men against a weaker opposition for a long time. I'd imagine this was the game he had earmarked as, you know, obviously he's coming up against his own. He doesn't want to, he wants to put up they want his side to put up some sort of performance. Just what you were saying there as well. I think once you throw your lot in with someone, I think all bets are off with any allegiances to other counties as well or anything. Yeah. I think you just totally immerse yourself in whatever project you're involved in or whatever team you're involved in. I don't see that being a side issue. The fact that it's in Limerick is what makes it. No more than Davy and Lohan, there'll be a few cat calls maybe and people shouting from the stand and stuff like that. But I don't think that will affect him. It is a very interesting subplot to his first competitive game, and the first game where they're going to be really tested. They're going to be exposed in certain areas maybe because Limerick have the capability of doing that no more than they did in the second half against Limerick last year or against Tipp last weekend. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. This is where he's really going to start learning.
Shane O'Neill has a very good track record at this point. Like, he took Napirshy to their first All-Ireland club title, and that was the first Limerick team to win an All-Ireland since God was a boy, I think, basically at a senior sort of a level. Won 2 Munster titles and two Limerick titles as well. So that really is a fair body of work over the course of a couple of years.
Yeah, I don't know if a Limerick team had won. Maybe Ballybrown or someone might have done. No, I don't think so. I don't.
Think it was the first since 73, was it?
73 could have been, yeah. It's a long time ago. So it's a fair achievement, and they'd been very competitive, obviously, up until that point, beaten in maybe 2 club semi-finals, I think, at that stage before they got to that stage. So he's brought them very, very far. Obviously got them back to when they played Coola as well. They'd be 2-time All-Ireland champions if they hadn't run into such a good Coola side as well. So his resume is fairly outstanding. This is in a roundabout way. This is a way back to Limerick, if you know what I mean. Yeah. He's earning a stripe somewhere else. He probably didn't envisage earning his stripes with a county of, you know, this size, of this kind of stature, and he has to put his stamp on things this year as well. Galway's been kind of same old the last few years, and I suppose one thing people would have said is there hasn't been enough faces introduced from they've won 4 of the last 5 minors. Disregard last year's minor and maybe the year before that, but you're expecting to see some of those guys starting to come through, and there'll probably be he can't just go with the tried and trusted at this stage. He has to introduce some new blood. We've kind of seen that already. But this weekend, I'd imagine he'd go with most of the old soldiers. He'll go with what he knows, I'd say, for this weekend.
It's interesting you mentioned that idea that this could be a potential audition for him to get the Limerick job later down the line. I don't know why it took so long, but I only got around to watching the Diego Maradona documentary there this past week. Have you seen it? It's absolutely unbelievable.
Which one? The one of him in Napoli?
The one. A lot of it's in Napoli, but it's all archive footage, and they've knitted it together beautifully. If you haven't watched it and you have an interest in soccer, it's just unbelievable. The same lads who did that Senna documentary, and like you mentioned the potential of Kylie to go back eventually, but in World Cup 1990, having been with Napoli for 6 or 7 years at this point, Maradona ends up in a semi-final of the World Cup against Italy, the country that had taken him in Naples, which is obviously the home of Napoli, and just by virtue of playing in that and winning, that actually soured his relationship and kind of sped up. You know, there was obviously an ignominious ending.
He hated after that.
Oh, of course. So the point that I'm kind of long-winded getting towards is that if Shane O'Neill comes up against Limerick with Galway, and these could be two teams that are challenging for All Ireland, he might end up actually putting noses out of joint and ultimately scuppering chances of taking that team. But I'd say he's got to be focused on Galway only. And do you feel that they're an All-Ireland contender? Because I see some people talking about, they're 4th or 5th in line at this point, by virtue of losing one game last summer and going out of the championship.
I'd question whether they're All-Ireland contenders, genuinely, yeah.
To what level, though? You know,
I don't know, 2018, obviously, they were a point within Limerick. I'm not just basing it on last year's Leinster, like not getting out of Leinster. I just think they've tailed off a lot, and I don't think we've seen anything new. I don't think we've seen anything new. Like, it's 19, it was basically, or 18 even, they were over-reliant on Johnny Glynn, a player who's not based in Ireland, only during the summer. 19, I didn't see that much pattern to them. Genuinely, even like the day against Kilkenny, like Kilkenny had 13 men that day, and they let TJ Reid run the show that day, which I was surprised. They came out with the result, don't get me wrong. Obviously Canning was missing. Canning's coming back now, but I'm just not sure. I just haven't seen enough. Like, basically when Canning got injured last year, I wrote them off completely. I just couldn't see, because you're just taking away a central man, and there's just no one else to pick up the fall. And I just wonder, there's still an awful lot of pressure on his shoulders, and I don't know who picks up the slack in his, not in his absence, but if he's a quiet there and like that. I'm not too sure what style they're playing or what their pattern is at the moment as well.
But nobody hammered Galway any harder than I did last summer for not having a lack of leaders. But that Kilkenny game you bring up in Nolan Park, the belly of the beast, I thought Brian Kincannon did well. I thought Jason Flynn, he did a couple of things whereby you're like, this guy's going to freeze on this stage. But then he stepped up and he created goal chances, and I thought he was very good and came through with a lot of credit. Cahill Mannion had a whirlwind of a day that day. So I thought, so I thought the potential for these guys is there. But is part of it too that some of their best players, the guys who've won the All-Stars, the guys that are expected to lead the line year after year, that they are now on the wrong side of their peak, or are just about hanging on to their peak?
They're gone, probably maybe just on the wrong side of their peak, as you say. But it's the lads that are pushing them. I'm not sure if they're there. Not that they're not there, but like a lot of people within Galway would say, okay, fair enough, maybe things need to be spiced up a bit, new faces need to come in, but are these new faces kind of ready? I don't know. And then there's a couple of kind of not stale players, but there's a bit of staleness in the team. Maybe this will shake it up. Maybe this will shake it up, and this is the energy kind of boost that they need.
They've got, as far as I know, I was talking to one of the local journalists there, there's 4 goalkeepers on the panel at the moment, but there's no one who's so obviously going to take over the mantle from what Colm Callan had when he was at his very, very best. I think that's definitely an issue.
That's tricky. I'm actually doing a piece for the paper tomorrow about Meads kind of
there are 11
problem. Yeah. Do you know, and while it's great to have competition and great to have 2 or 3 lads at a level, it is also nice to have, this is my number 1 goalie and I've got some good backup, and this is what we're going to go with for league and championship, and lads are getting used to it. Whereas when you're moving around, and you saw there was trouble with that even when James Cahill coming in, Fergal Flannery coming in, Colm Callan coming in. So it's not easy, especially with Shane O'Neill coming in, but I think he's going to have to go with someone in goals and stick with it.
Because Tipp did that last year. I mean, I think it was midway through the league, Paul Maher was brought in from out of the squad and thrown into the team. Ultimately, Brian Hogan gets the gig. But it is something that you would like to settle it nice and early.
It was tricky with Darragh Mooney the year before as well. So, like, by all accounts, Mick Ryan said after the league semi-final when they beat Limerick down in Thurles in 18 that Darragh Mooney was his number 1 goalie. And then Brian Hogan started championship, and it's just the whole thing is at a state of kind of flux. Do you know what I mean? And I personally would think that it would put things at ease a small bit. You know, people would be, or not at ease, the opposite effect actually, that would unnerve people a small bit, just because you're not just sure who's going to be there. You just don't have that stability, I suppose.
And then you have to look, when we're talking about Galway as an All-Ireland contender, they need goal getters. And if we look at Westmeath last week, that game, Conor Whelan scored a brilliant goal, cutting in from the left-hand side and blasting it off his stick. But the starting inside line, they got just one score, and that was that goal from Whelan against Westmeath, who they beat by 17 points. Joe Canning has been playing out in centre forward for the last few years. It's actually, this is a stat I got from Galway journalist David Connors. He was saying he reckons now, he wasn't 100% on it, it's 32 games without a goal from play for Joe Canning. And I think it's always that conundrum from Galway. Do you have him closer to goal, or do you have him further away, sort of running the play for you? Because, you know, Tipperary have the luxury of a few playmakers further out the field, and therefore Callan can stay inside, and obviously he interchanges, but you can have him inside getting goals. Kilkenny have Colin Fennelly, very different type of goal threat, but a really big goal threat inside. Patrick Horgan staying inside, and now Shane Kingston gone inside for Cork too. So you can see the point I'm getting at, that essentially, do you think that Galway could potentially look at moving him back in there?
It's definitely a possibility. Like, if you look over the last couple of years, they've racked up big tallies of points, even when they won the All-Ireland. I don't think they scored a goal in their last 4 games, would I be right in saying? I don't know if that's as big of a runner now with even higher scoring games. When when you're scoring like 224 and things like that, I think you need to be clocking up a couple of goals. I think it's interesting. I think it would change the opposition team's approach. Like, imagine he lands in at the edge of the square. Like, it just causes wreck amongst the opposition. But it does also take away a lot from them out the field.
And the other thing is, if you're playing centre forward, and at times he's wing forward, if you're playing centre forward, it's the one position in the forward line where you mightn't get marked that tightly. Whereas you go inside in full forward, you're going to have a lad setting up inside in your jocks.
Yeah, there's an awful lot more hardship inside, I would say. Probably increase the likelihood of getting injured as well, particularly hand injuries and stuff like that, if they're bombarding ball in the edge of the square. But I just think something different is needed. It was interesting. Maybe Conor Whelan was starting full forward the last day and played most of the time at full forward rather than at number 13. Maybe that's a change. I wouldn't see anything wrong with putting a Canning in there maybe with him. It's who replaces him out the field then.
Carl Mannion maybe.
Possibly, yeah. He's played out around midfield. To the best of my knowledge, David Burke is going to be back in a couple of weeks as well. Maybe they'll look at playing him midfield, maybe with Johnny Cohen again, and maybe they'll push Cahill Mannion up, maybe into that centre forward position. But it would definitely, he wants space as well, because he can get 4 or 5 points from midfield, half forward and around there. So maybe something like that would work. The fact that Joe played centre forward in the first game, is that a sign of what's going to come? I don't know, but I wouldn't see any issue with a bit of change and change it up a bit.
We're both going to be in the Gaelic grounds. I can see Limerick putting out a very strong team and laying down a marker. I want to touch on Waterford, because they're playing Westmeath, who of course went down to 14 men, and any chance they had went out the window with that. Killian Doyle had been carrying an injury. He had to go off also. But just looking at Waterford, I did a piece for the RT website just during the week, and one of the things is Liam Cahill. So he's going into a team that had, you know, I think everyone would talk about that close bond that Derek McGrath had with his players. And this is a guy who, he's had some brilliant quotes from over the years. And like, he's it seems like a very different approach. Like, he talked about how in 2016, he and this is sort of a quote, he had mammies and daddies getting on to him about their players, about their son getting dropped, and he was saying that every parent think that their geese are swans, but not all geese are swans. And the other thing he talked about was that his responsibility, this is minor Tipp manager, was to send good hurlers up the line, and he wasn't going to send soft hurlers up the line. So it just feels like a real departure. Obviously Pádraig Fanning managed in the meantime, but it feels like a real departure from what these players were used to.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, you know. You can sometimes, when you have the arm around your shoulder, it can work to some extent, but it works when the results are going well. But they've had consistently poor results. Obviously, haven't had that championship win since the 17 semi-final. Something needed to change. So perhaps like it's the bad cop approach. You know, maybe it's something that they need. I know from chatting a few of the players, and definitely from chatting Austin Gleeson and even Stephen Bennett, that it kind of lit a fire under them. And even seeing, and I hate to keep referencing it, but seeing Noel Connors and Maurice Shannon dropped left everybody on edge and left everybody in no doubt that we're just going to have to do what he wants us to do. And it's a great result for them. Last weekend was a great result for them starting out, because it reinforces that what he's doing is, well, it's definitely right at this moment in time anyway.
It's a real my way or the highway sort of approach. That's what I'm feeling from it. I'm very interested to see what he does with the inside forward line with Desi Hutchinson. He was a corner forward himself, and he was a prodigious sort of a talent, and it never fully happened for him. But you'd imagine he'd be starting to tell Desi, look, you're an unbelievable athlete, you're a Premier League footballer. When you get the ball, rather than drifting out the field, you got to turn and go at your man. Mikey Beavens, who's a Toomevara man, who's in as a coach with him and is very well respected in Tipperary for his level of coaching. Also a corner forward who sickened teams in North Tipperary for years, sickened teams in Tipperary. You'd imagine this, like Waterford's problem has been scoring. In the previous decade, so 2010 to 2019, in the Championship, Waterford averaged 22 points per game if you convert goals to points. Last year, it was 18 points, in a fairly disastrous summer in terms of results. You'd imagine goals are going to be big for him, because in his last 4 years, and this is stats heavy, Pat Spillane heavy here, in his last 4 seasons with Tipperary underage teams, which was minor, under 21 and under 20, they scored 47 goals.
I actually hadn't thought about it, to be honest.
That's Championship only, by the way.
I actually hadn't thought about the fact that basically manager and coach are two corner forwards. It definitely, I'm not saying that there's not an emphasis on the backs and the work that's been done in the back line, but there's definitely a really heavy emphasis on the forward line, and a really heavy emphasis on goal getting and score getting, which is Waterford's biggest problem over the last couple of years, as you've highlighted with your stats. So that'll be interesting. I think rather than taking the option of, and you mentioned Desi there, going out the field and maybe playing the ball across the pitch, or shooting a point over his shoulder, I think we'll start to see it over the coming weeks and months, that when they get the ball around there, and they mightn't be on the whole time, but they'll try and force a goal. They'll try and do something that can break a game rather than just take the handy option. Like the Tipp teams, like the All-Ireland under 25 last year, they killed Cork with goals. They killed them with goals. Cork were a class side and they just killed them with goals. So I'd imagine that's the sort of, it's hard beat goals, it's hard beat the impetus that they give. So I think he'll be fairly top heavy on things like that.
So Cork faded out against Waterford last week. Well, I suppose like you get a 2-goal lead inside 3 minutes, you get to find yourself 5 points down. Ultimately, that's a fair fade out. Now they nearly levelled it at the end, and they possibly should have, because they had a couple of pointed attempts that came up short. But Cork are against Tipperary this weekend, Saturday night, Páirc Uí Chaoimh. Tipperary are coming off the back of a fade-out loss to Limerick, albeit a far more experimental team. So I think Tipperary is All-Ireland champions. They can kind of take or leave too many wins and losses. It'd be nice to get them, but it's about developing players. Do you think for Kieran Kingston he actually does want to get a few results on the board too?
He definitely does, and he's under pressure in the sense that the UCC boys have had a lot of traffic on their bodies now as well, and could be facing 3 big games within a week, basically. Actually, that's Saturday night, is it?
The Tipp one, yeah. Tipp Cork is, yeah.
We're facing 3 big games in 6 days, so he's going to, either if he plays them, he's risking injury, and if he doesn't play them, he's risking probably a higher risk of defeat as well, and a second defeat in a row, having come back. So that's the risk he takes. He wants to develop players, but there's that really fine balance of developing players and getting results. And yeah, last weekend would have been really disappointing. And then listen, just hearing the audio from Liam Sheedy that you had up actually the other day, he was happy with the defeat in a way. He was happy. He got out of it what he wanted to get out of it. He got game time for these developing players, these players that he thinks will win or lose him the All-Ireland, having these extra couple of players on board. I'd imagine Tipp are probably in a better position going into the game. Like it's like a horse having a run, coming on for a run. They faded out in the second half. A lot of them that weren't playing Fitzgibbon will have had another week under the belt, another week's training, and will come in bouncing this weekend. So it's a big game for both. I'd fancy Tipp just because you have a fair degree you know what you're going to get out of them at this stage.
I wonder if Tipperary put out an experimental enough side, again, backbone by, like for example, last week you had the Mahers playing and you had John McGrath centre forward, just as a snapshot of the team that was out there, forward, full forward. So you can see there's that sort of fairly strong spine to the team. If a very experimental Tipperary team was to go down to Cork and beat a Cork team that they feel is gunning for this, that would be a fair blow to the Rebels.
Yeah, and it'd be a fair blow and another early blow as well. There's always the caveat of how early it is with league action and stuff like that, but you don't want to, particularly coming back in the second term, you don't want to be coming in and having the knives out already at this stage. Sheedy has like a load of credit in the bank. He can do what he wants throughout the league.
He's going for a personal 3 in a row.
And they're not going to get relegated. That doesn't even come into the equation. So he can learn a lot throughout the league. Kieran Kingston needs to learn, but he needs to get results as well. Like I was only thinking about it. Like someone asked me who would gain most from winning the league, and you're thinking a couple of teams. Would Tipp gain much? Not sure. Would Limerick gain much after winning last year? Not sure. Would Cork gain much? Yeah, they'd gain a hell of a lot. Cork or Wexford would gain a hell of a lot, and it would get, number one with Cork, it would get rid of this idea of we're a summer team. It would get rid of this idea of we're kind of too nice, and maybe that we have to have perfect conditions and everything. And number three, it would get rid of the stigma, or not stigma, but the defensive issues that they have as well. To win a league, they'd have to be very, very tight defensively. So, like, I think they have a lot more to gain from Saturday night than Tipp have. But I still wouldn't have that much faith in them that they produce a result. Saying that, they could go down and you could see after 10 minutes Patrick Horgan has 3 or 4 points got and they're bouncing off the ground, and it's a different type of a game. It's a free-flowing game. But I've just seen too much with Cork in recent years. Too many kind of fade outs, too many like barren spells throughout games, too many times where they're dominated in games and where the game is over them before they realise it, to have that much faith in them.
The one reason that I think Tipp would like to win the league is because they're the record league holders with 19. Kilkenny are now up to 18. So I think you'd like to stave that off. Not the biggest concern in the world, but the flip side is any county, especially if they're a dual county, you don't want to be pushed late on into the league, meaning that April month, which you'd like to have as much game or time with your players as possible, becomes cramped, especially in a dual county. Can you imagine? Like, because Tipperary have players that play seriously with both sides, like Lockmore, for example. That would be tough going. But yeah, other than that, I'd feel like Cork could do with it. I'd say Davy would love to win one. I'd say Limerick would. I actually do think Limerick would too, because I think they like to win everything.
I don't think Liam Sheedy would say it, but I think he'd love to finish fourth. Fourth or fifth. Probably fourth, because it's, you're still leaning towards the top half. And it just would buy them a bit of time. Like, the league is over quite early this year if you don't reach knockout stages. So I think the quarterfinals are on March 7th. So there will be a lot of time for club games to be played late March, early April. I know April is the club month. I think in Offaly we're playing championship in March, late March, because that buys. I think we're playing late March, first weekend in April, and then lads can go back to the county or whatever, and they have time. I don't know if they'll say it publicly, but I imagine that's the sort of scenario Tipp would like as well.
Dublin against Laois this weekend at Parnell Park. Now, Laois have been definitely missing players. Matty Kenny was asked specifically about players he's missing. He's dealt a list. Liam Rush, Conal Keeney, Fionn McGibb, a couple more players too. But it's so important for Dublin to get a win, just so that the nagging kind of doubts from last year, from what's happened at the start of this year, even losing Walsh Cup to Galway, which isn't that important. Like, winning is a habit, and I know Matty very well. He'll want to win this game.
It's losing like a World Cup semi-final, that is not important, but when that stacks up with been beaten by Laois last year, been beaten by Galway in the World Cup, it's always nice to, like, if you can get a title under your belt, it's just a little bit of money in the bank or whatever. Last weekend was atrocious. No point in saying any different. It was atrocious. They showed absolutely nothing. It was a real malfunction. All over the pitch, it was a malfunction. Starting in goals, and I'd imagine to be a fair, I don't know if there'll be a spring in their step, but there'll be this nagging thing in the back of their head where they think, we have to show something this weekend. We have to show something. They shouldn't need any motivation with Laois coming up to Dublin, in fairness. After last year, the whole thing that has set off this, like, in inverted commas, rot was Laois. And now it's a different Laois side than the one that would have played Dublin last year. They're down a fair few bodies as well. They'll probably see this as a decent opportunity, especially they played against Wexford last weekend, were very competitive for long stages, and Wexford's class kind of pulled through. They're playing a Dublin side who were abysmal against Kilkenny last weekend, So they're coming in and probably smelling an opportunity. And if they were to get a result, there's a great chance of them avoiding any relegation playoff or anything like that. Because if all they have to do is get a result then against Carlow and they're safe.
I think Matty would love to get an extended run of the league now, and I know they got to the semi-final last year, could have gotten hammered by Limerick, but actually kind of pegged them back. And in, like, if we look at Group B of Division 1, so they've lost to Kilkenny. The other teams in there are Laois, Carlow, Wexford, Clare. They actually have a fair chance. If they can turn it around, and 100% turn it around quickly, they actually could make a decent burst in the league. And the reason that I'd say he'd want to keep the team together as long as possible is he just wants game time with him. He wants to hone that game plan. And like I've seen, it took a couple of years to get that game plan going with Kula. And it evolved over time. But I just think the more time he gets with them, the more he feels he can mould them the way he wants them.
And particularly up front. And particularly if you have a fit Mark Schutte.
And they look poor up front at the moment.
Yeah, they did, yeah. And like Mark Schutte was involved last year, but hardly did he play a minute?
He's just pretty much injured the whole time. And even this year, like he played against Galway, didn't go his way, came on the last day, but like the entire forward line was shocking. Imagine having 15 men from most of the game and looking like you're the team that's down a man.
Yeah, and Donald Burke obviously is back in as well. He's going to be busy with DCU, but he's back in there too. And they'll want to integrate Conal Keeney back in there. They'll want to have some sort of shape on their forward line by the end of the league. An extra game. If they get their house in order, they could still easily get second or third. They could definitely third anyway. If Wexford were to beat them, that means they have to beat Clare, Carlow, and Laois. So it's still very, very achievable. And chatting to some people in Dublin, they kind of think the league is going to be a bit of a slow burner and they'll be slow to kind of come around. I'm not sure if they can afford that. They're not the sort of team where they've done nothing in the league and then they're coming into the championship and they're like waiting in the long grass. I think they're a team that needs to do it consistently to almost have the confidence that they're going to do it again in championship. They did it last year in the league. Like, did a good run in the league, followed up in championship.
And Laois, it's a fair old dry run for the championship, so they'll want to get good performances there. Carlow, of course, going down to the Joe McDonagh this year, beaten fairly handily by Clare last week. This week, welcoming what, if it's anything like the Kilkenny team we saw hammer Dublin last week, it's going to be a fairly experimental Kilkenny team. So what can we expect from Carlow here?
Yeah, they're down a few bodies and they can't afford to be, like, you've chatted to them as well at different stages, and Colin Bonner, and you're talking about, is it 4 senior clubs that they're picking from? If they're down 1 or 2, they're in a bit of bother. When they have everybody, they're a tough nut, they're hard to beat, but when they're missing a couple, they can struggle. Like last year, Kilkenny came to Dr. Cullen Park for the championship and had him blitzed within 10 or 15 minutes to 3 goals and the game was over. So
now Carlow went well after that, but the game was over.
Yeah, in relative terms, it's a moral victory of sorts thereafter. We kept them level for the last 50 minutes.
It's empty calories.
Kind of is, yeah. Empty kilocalories. Yeah. It's like eating Rice Krispies. But it'd be interesting because they were poor last weekend. Like, I thought the Clare game would be a lot tighter than it was, to be fair. And they hit 14 points and conceded, I think it was 127, was it? 124 or 127. So 14 points not going to win anything. It's not going to be competitive in anything even. Need to be getting up towards 18 or 19. Like Mouse Kavanagh's kept quiet enough last week. If he's quiet and Chris Nolan and these guys are kept quiet, they're under pressure. But they seem to be down a couple of bodies and they just can't afford to be.
And then the other game of the weekend is Wexford and Clare. We've done a specific segment on the Davy Fitz versus Brian Lowen feud, so I should check that out in the playlist. Feud? Yeah, I've decided it's a feud. Well, they're not talking to each other.
It's like the road to WrestleMania. This is the feud. It'd be very funny. It'd be very interesting if they were to meet further down the line, which they probably will. Like it'd be.
You're suggesting that Clare are going to get out of Munster this year?
If they got, I don't think they will, but for this sole reason, I hope they do.
Yeah, for the feud.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting. Like Davy after, like Lowen won't say too much after, but Davy, like the question will be posed after, and he'll have that little, he'll be like, and that's what you want, like,
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Again, it's always very hard to know what's the importance of this. So it's a case of just developing players for these two teams. Again, like Wexford want to find 1 or 2 more just to add to what they had last year, because they're still going to feel like they're not too far away.
No, and it's developing players all around, yeah. The ideal scenario, as I said to you before, is developing players while having 11 to 12 regulars beside them, because it's an accurate reflection of someone. Like what you said last weekend, the Tipp spine was very strong. So at least if you're giving a lad a chance, cornerback, he's getting a fair chance. Wexford at the moment are as strong as they can be, minus Matt O'Hanlon, Lee Chin. Rory O'Connor is a bit kind of cup tight at the moment, can't play as much time, and Dermot O'Keefe is away. So there's 3 or 4 lads getting a chance there as well. Davey probably won't say it, but being in the weaker division is no harm for him as well, and having the pressure off is absolutely no harm for the likes of Wexford as well. It just gives more players more of a chance, more of an exposure at that level with it's really low risk, like, you know.
Great stuff.
It's the job.
Thanks for watching Our Game. Don't forget to like and share the videos, and if you're new to the channel, hit subscribe.